An urgent statement on the situation of migrants at Calais.
The Home Secretary, Secretary Theresa May.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, industrial action by striking French workers yesterday caused significant disruption at the ports of Calais and Coquelles in northern France. This action resulted from a dispute between local trade unions and the owners of the French ferry operator My Ferry Link. As a result of this disruptive strike, the port of Calais was shut for a period of over 13 hours, and train departures were suspended at the Channel Tunnel rail port of Coquelles. Sadly, the strikers damaged SNCF railway tracks outside the tunnel, which led to the cancellation of all Eurostar services until 6 o'clock this morning. More generally, the disruption caused backlogs of traffic in the Calais area, which presented existing migrants around the town with opportunities to attempt to enter slow-moving lorries. The French and UK governments were well prepared for this event. Tried and tested contingency plans were quickly put into place. Despite the extra pressure caused by the French strikers, Border Force maintained border security by following plans to put additional staff in place to search freight vehicles passing through the affected ports during the industrial action and thereafter. All freight vehicles passing through the Calais ports undergo searching by both the French authorities and the UK's Border Force before boarding a ferry or train. During the course of yesterday's disruption and since, Border Force and the French authorities have successfully identified and intercepted a significant number of would-be migrants. Last night I spoke with the French Interior Minister, Bernard Cazeneuve. He was as grateful as I was for the strong cooperation between UK and French authorities during yesterday's incident, and I thanked him for the French police's efforts to maintain law and order in the Calais area. Our two governments have been working closely together and constructively in recent months to bolster security at the juxtaposed border at Calais and other French ports. Last September, Her Majesty's government committed £12 million to this work. This has led to the installation of fencing around the port of Calais and the approach road, and improvements to the layout of the port to speed up flows of traffic and create secure buffer zones for heavy goods vehicles. This is in addition to £3 million spent on the provision of new scanners and detection technology to assist with the searching of freight vehicles and additional dog searching undertaken by contractors. At the port of Coquelles, we have already provided significant investment in upgrading perimeter security and freight screening technology. We will continue to work with Eurotunnel and the French authorities on installing additional security measures at the site to prevent migrants from making incursions into the port. More broadly, the ongoing situation in Calais serves as an important reminder of why EU member states need to work together to tackle the causes of illegal immigration in source and transit countries. We are already cooperating closely with the French to tackle the organised criminal gangs that facilitate the movement of migrants into and across Europe. UK and French law enforcement organisations have already had considerable success in dismantling criminal networks behind the people trafficking and smuggling on both sides of the Channel, resulting in the prosecution of 223 individuals, and Mr Cazeneuve and I have agreed to build on this important work. As the Prime Minister and I have repeatedly made clear, the most important step to resolving the situation in the Mediterranean is breaking the link between migrants making this dangerous journey and achieving settlement in Europe. Mr Speaker, traffic on both sides of the Channel is moving again. There will, however, continue to be a significant border security operation as the backlogs of traffic are cleared at the affected ports. The inconvenience caused by the French strikers to the travelling public and lorry drivers is deeply regrettable. Though yesterday's incident was caused by events that were beyond the control of Her Majesty's government, our law enforcement organisations reacted to events extremely well. I'm sure the House will want to join me in commending the excellent work done by Border Force, Kent Police and others on both sides of the Channel who have worked tirelessly to maintain border security and minimise disruption to the travelling public. I commend this statement to the House.
Mr Speaker, the situation in Calais, as the Home Secretary rightly says, has been caused by a wider humanitarian issue across the whole of the Mediterranean and North Africa, and is caused by hunger, civil war, political instability, and by movement of peoples across the Mediterranean. But the situation in Calais clearly last night, alongside the strike, has continued to cause problems which have been present for some time now, including a visit I made in November of last year, and remains a real challenge. Could the Home Secretary say, particularly in her discussions with the French Interior Minister, what steps she's taking to ensure that the French government assess, process, identify and take action on those at Calais? Because, as the Home Secretary has rightly said, they are victims of people traffickers, but they are also in France and are the responsibility of the French government. Will she ensure that she undertakes resistance to calls from some quarters in France to end the UK border presence at Calais, because that is extremely important in maintaining the integrity of our borders? Could she say what steps the Prime Minister intends to raise at the European Summit in this weekend with regard to the points he made at Prime Minister's questions with regard to the situation in Italy and Southern Europe? Because that, again, as the Prime Minister and indeed the Home Secretary has said, is key to the intentions of people at Calais. Could she be clear to the House as to what proportion of the £12 million that both the Prime Minister has indicated and she has indicated has been spent to date? Because she will recall that £12 million is a 3-year programme and we are in only year 1. So I would like her to be clear as to stop talking about £12 million and talk about what's been spent to date, and whether or not we require further resources to meet the challenges that are there. Could she and the Transport Secretary, on behalf of both, give advice to hauliers, train operators and the public about what assessment they should make, and whether there are compensation claims to be made in the light of yesterday's particular incident, because that equally is important? And could she perhaps, again via the Transport Secretary in due course, give an assessment of whether Operation Stack in the southern part of England operated effectively and was an effective response yesterday? And could she finally, Mr. Speaker, indicate the new task force that has been announced by her today? Could she say a little bit about its remit, its resource, and what she would measure as a success of that task force? Because it is important that we look at those issues clearly. I would like her also, if she could, particularly, Mr. Speaker, to give some indication again of her commitment to tackle the scourge of people traffickers, but also to work with our European partners and with our European police forces to ensure that we tackle the scourge of people traffickers. And I would like her to give a commitment, Mr. Speaker, to report regularly to this House on the success of that task force and how it will achieve its objectives. This is a humanitarian crisis, Mr. Speaker. The Home Secretary will have the support of Her Majesty's opposition in dealing with this, because it's important we deal with this for those victims of that humanitarian crisis, but it's also important, Mr. Speaker, we deal with it for the integrity of our borders. And in my view, the French need to take further action to ensure they support us in both of those objectives.
Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the Right Honourable Gentleman has raised quite a number of issues in the questions that he's posed to me. But first of all, if I might say, he referred to the fact that he had visited Calais last year. And indeed, when he did that, I believe that he said that in relation to the problems of migrants building up at Calais, this is not new. We saw problems over 10 years ago. That's precisely why the last Labour government worked with the French government then to introduce the juxtaposed controls. And this was the 2K agreement was an important agreement, and I can reassure the Right Honourable Gentleman that we certainly intend to do everything we can to maintain those juxtaposed controls. They are an important part of our border security, and we will continue to work with the French authorities, as previous governments have done, to ensure that they are maintained and operate well. In relation to the issue of processing people, of course, as my right honourable friend the Prime Minister indicated in Prime Minister's questions when the acting leader of the opposition asked him about this issue, there is a challenge actually to the Italian authorities, because of course people are due to be processed and fingerprinted when they first arrive on European shores, and that is for the majority of these people in Italy. And we are working again together with my French opposite number. We've been working with the Italian government and across, indeed, other member states in Europe to encourage Italy to do exactly that. And this is one of the issues. Of course, the European Council will be looking at the question of Mediterranean migration, as did the Justice and Home Affairs Council that I attended in Luxembourg last week. One of the key messages that we have been giving consistently from the United Kingdom, that others support, is that the best means of dealing with this issue is actually to break the link. That's about ensuring that people see that if they make this dangerous journey, they are not going to achieve settlement in Europe. But we do need to work to break the organised criminal gangs and the people traffickers, and I can assure the Right Honourable Gentleman that the new task force that is bringing together people from the National Crime Agency, from Border Force, from Immigration Enforcement and from the CPS, some of those who will be based overseas, as well as some being based here in the UK, will be working not just among those organisations, those parts of the British agencies, but also working with the French authorities and others to ensure that there is better intelligence, a better understanding of where these gangs are, what the routes are, so that we can take appropriate action against him. I absolutely agree. It is this party in coalition government that actually introduced the Modern Slavery Act, which makes it easier for law enforcement to deal with these human traffickers. And obviously, that is an important piece of legislation. He asked about the road hauliers. My honourable friend, the Immigration Minister, has had a number of meetings and conversations with representatives of road hauliers, talking to them about the security aspects. And as regards Operation Stack, overall, we do believe that it worked well. Of course, it is a process that has been in place for some time, but of course, the Department for Transport will continue to look at that, and about half of the 12 million has already been spent.
Mr. Kenneth Clarke.
Mr. Speaker, obviously the member states of the European Union, none of them can just take in the vast numbers of people who are fleeing here from poverty and oppression in Africa and the Middle East. But does my right honourable friend agree that the moral and practical dilemma is it's not going to be possible for Italy, France or the United Kingdom simply to ship back men, women and children who risked their lives crossing the Mediterranean into Somalia, Eritrea, Syria, other places where they face death and oppression? So in addition to the very welcome steps she's described about EU member states beginning to work together as opposed to try to blame each other, it's farcical to blame the mayor of Calais and the French for the present situation, will she say whether any work's being done to try to identify, locate and finance civilised camps where people can be held in decent conditions whilst they're processed and not left drifting destitute to all kinds of places over Europe, and whilst there they can be processed and proper plans can be made for how you are going to resettlement in some place where they can properly find new lives?
My right honourable friend has raised some important issues, but I would say to him that it is wrong to assume that all the people who are coming through these particular routes are people who would be refugees or would actually have valid asylum claims. There are many significant numbers who are not coming from countries that he has referred to, but coming from countries like Senegal and Nigeria and other countries in West Africa, and for whom obviously the issue is somewhat different. And there are many people who are coming across from Libya into Italy who are actually economic migrants who are trying to get illegally into Europe and get settlement. That's why breaking the link is so important in terms of those individuals knowing that they should not be making this dangerous journey because they will not get settlement in Europe as a result of that. But it's also why dealing with the human traffickers and the people smugglers is important. But we are talking within the European arena about the possibility of establishing within certainly looking currently at West Africa, establishing places where it is possible to return people to. So that we can do that. But the other side of this is actually working in those countries like the ones that he's mentioned, using aid money to ensure that we are developing those countries in a way that means that we're reducing poverty in those countries and reducing the temptation or the incentive for people to try the move.
That exchange was of singular interest and should probably be preserved and will be in the official report for the delectation of future generations. However, if others imitate it in length, we will be here for some hours. Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whilst delays to cross-channel transport are concerning and the associated disruption, surely the bigger issue is, as others have touched upon, the humanitarian aspect. Some of the migrants trying to cross from Calais to Dover are desperate, and many have gone through unimaginable suffering and are risking their lives in the hope of a better life in the United Kingdom. Many are fleeing countries that the United Kingdom had a hand in destabilising. We need to take our fair share of refugees in the UK, as we have a proud tradition of doing in the past, from the Kinder transport in the 1930s to the Ugandan refugees in the 1970s. Even Mrs Thatcher took some of the Vietnamese boat people, although not as many as other countries. The Scottish National Party and the Scottish Government remain committed to assisting in this matter. We believe that there should be cross-country cooperation across the European Union. Will the United Kingdom Government accept the help of the Scottish Government and also participate in multilateral and collective action across the European Union to deal with the problem of these refugees?
Well, say to the Honourable Lady, there are a number of ways in which the government is actually addressing this issue of refugees. I mean, first of all, in relation to those who are displaced from Syria, who are refugees as a result of what is happening in Syria, this government is the second largest bilateral donor to the region in terms of the money that we have made available for refugee camps. There are many, many people who are being given medical treatment, water, food, clothing and shelter as a result of the money that is being given by this government, getting close to £900 million now. And I think we should be proud of the fact that we have done that, because if you look at the numbers of people who are refugees in those areas, these will not be accommodated by allowing everybody to move to Europe. Many of them actually want to be able to return to their home country in due course, and I think giving that provision in that area is important. In relation to Scotland and asylum seekers, it is of course open to the Honourable Lady to encourage local authorities in Scotland to take larger numbers of the asylum seekers that we disperse around the United Kingdom.
Tim Loughton.
Mr Speaker, can I also commend the work of the Border Force, who have deterred tens of thousands of illegal migrants coming to this country. Without their effectiveness, the French would have rather a lot more to complain about. If it became known as a weak link, many thousands more would pour into Calais. But can I ask her what she is doing to bust the myth that we saw as the Home Affairs Select Committee of those people trafficked to Calais who think that we are some sort of El Dorado where they will get jobs, benefits and support services. The truth is that they absolutely won't, and they will be illegal. What are we doing to bust that myth, to deter people from going to Calais in the first place in the hope of coming here illegally?
Well, my honourable friend makes an important point, but because it is important that people understand what this journey means and what they will be coming to, and the dangers of the journey. And we have indeed been working with the French authorities in terms of the messages that are given to people who are reaching through to Calais about the fact that they should be claiming asylum in France. And indeed, the French authorities over the last year, by the end of this year, will have more than trebled the number of people processed for asylum in Calais compared to 2013.
Mr Keith Vaz.
Mr Speaker, this is a crisis that has been waiting to happen, and no blame should be attached to the government on this, because I think enormous amounts of money has been spent to try and deal with security in Calais, as the Honourable Member for East Sussex and I and the Honourable Member for Walsall North saw for ourselves. But the issue is the Mediterranean. Once they get to Calais, it is too late. Once they enter France, it is too late. That is why I welcome the establishment of the task force. The task force has to work with the governments of the Maghreb. They are the key to preventing people setting sail in the first place. And it's not just the Italian border, it is also the Greek-Turkish border. So she will have our support in trying to ensure that other EU countries bear their responsibility as well.
Well, I thank the right honourable gentleman for his question. May I take this opportunity of congratulating him on his re-election to the chairmanship of the Home Affairs Select Committee. I dare say he and I will be looking across a room in the House of Commons at each other on a number of occasions over the coming months. Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, he's right to identify that we need to do something about the issue of it's about the journeys from parts of Africa through the Mediterranean, obviously crucially from Libya into Italy, but he's right, there are also those who are transporting and being moved from the Greek and Turkish borders through into, obviously, into Europe. We will, of course, work with governments elsewhere in Africa and elsewhere to ensure that we get an understanding of these movements and are able to deal with the criminal gangs. That's why I'm pleased that the National Crime Agency has already been giving a focus on this and is increasing that focus.
Nusrat Ghani.
Mr Speaker,
Can I commend the work of our border force officers whose diligent work to protect the UK border was certainly not helped by the actions of the French strikers yesterday?
My honourable friend is right. I mean, people have talked about the issues that we saw yesterday in terms, I think the right honourable gentleman, the member for Leicester East, referred to crisis in this. Of course, the issue of migrants gathering at Calais is one that has been there for some time. As the right honourable gentleman, the spokesman for the opposition, said, this is something that we saw many years ago, and we see it. But of course, it was exacerbated yesterday by the action of the French strikers, which meant there were lorries queuing, and therefore there was a greater opportunity and incentive for the migrants to try to clamber on those.
Anna Turley.
Mr. Speaker. I'd like to join the Right Honourable Lady in paying tribute to the UK Border Force, who do a fantastic job around the country. But I would like to ask, given that in the last fortnight a further 50 illegal immigrants were found in the back of a lorry that arrived in another major UK port, we have a serious issue here, not just in Dover and Calais, but around the rest of the UK. I'd like to ask her that, given that I know there are redundancies taking place in Teesport, in UK Border Agency, in my constituency, will she put a stop to any immediate frontline redundancies that are taking place and ensure that what's happening down in Calais is not going to suck resource from around the country and put other ports at risk?
The aim of Border Force is to have a flexible workforce, that it is possible, as we have seen with this particular issues that have arisen at Calais, to have officers who can be moved around so that we can reinforce particular ports when we need to. We are, of course, very conscious of the fact that there have been clandestines found in the backs of lorries entering the UK through other ports, and indeed I have already referred to this matter with the Dutch Immigration Minister, and there will be talks between ministers here in the UK and Dutch ministers about how we can help to reinforce the Hook of Holland, and indeed we're already making some extra capacity available to do that.
Mr. Stephen Phillips.
Mr. Speaker, the path to Calais may begin in Khartoum or Conakry or other places in Africa, but it passes through a number of Schengen countries on the way to Calais. Now, those countries, of course, have no borders internally. What discussions is she having with other European counterparts to make sure that they take their own responsibility for this concentration, which is what we have in Calais, of this humanitarian disaster which we're seeing?
Well, my honourable friend is perfectly right in pointing out the fact that these migrants who come to Calais will have come through a number of Schengen countries. Obviously, we are not a member of Schengen, and it is up to those countries who are a member of Schengen to look at the rules that they operate. But my honourable friend may also have seen that last week there was activity by the French authorities, actually at the French-Italian border, because of concerns of the way in which migrants were able to move through from Italy.
Mr. Stephen Twigg.
Just now, the Home Secretary rightly reminded the House of the importance of aid policy in addressing the causes of this increased migration. Can we take opportunities in the next few days to remind our European Union partners of their obligations to match our 0.7% commitment, and in particular to press the French government, who are cutting development assistance at this time?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, and can I congratulate him also, I believe, on his recent election to chair the DFID Select Committee. Yes, indeed, we do. And in fact, when I was at the Justice and Home Affairs Council last week, I raised the issue of Europe collectively needing to look at how the money that Europe disperses as aid money can be used to ensure that it is being properly used to alleviate poverty in those sorts of areas where we see people coming from.
Mr. Damien Green.
Fred is absolutely right that preserving good relations with the French government so that our border is effectively at Calais and Coquelles as opposed to Dover and Folkestone is the biggest single contribution to the integrity of our borders in this part of the country. But she also said that Operation Stack worked well. Can I gently point out that it may work well in an administrative term, but whenever it comes on, it causes huge disruption and misery to my constituents and thousands of other people in Kent. And so, can she take this opportunity to redouble efforts with her right honourable friend, the Transport Secretary, to make sure that alternatives to Operation Stack are brought in, because every time it comes in, it causes massive disruption to one of our biggest road routes to Europe.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for gently pointing that out to me. He is making his representations, and I know representations are made to me on a regular basis by my honourable friend, the member for Dover, as well in relation to the impact that these incidents have on the port and the surrounding transport network. I will raise the comments that my right honourable friend has made in the House with my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Transport.
Stephen Gethins.
I think the Secretary of State, Mr Speaker, makes a fair point about the work of humanitarian organisations in the theatre. We all applaud that. But does she realise that we're facing the worst refugee crisis since the war, that the UK response has been described as paling in comparison to that of other EU countries? Will she welcome the Scottish Government's offer to work with them and take more Syrian refugees on the resettlement programme?
First of all, we have taken several thousand Syrians have been able to claim asylum in recent years here in the United Kingdom. We have the scheme, the Vulnerable Peoples Relocation Scheme, which we introduced, which the Prime Minister announced last weekend. We will be slightly expanding, and that is focusing on the most vulnerable, working with UNHCR, which I think it is important for us to do. But I have to say to the honourable gentleman that to describe the donation of £900 million worth of aid to refugees, supporting many people's lives through medical provisions, through water, through food, through shelter, as pitiful, is quite wrong. I think this country should be proud of the fact that we have taken such a leading role.
Order. The Home Secretary is giving her answer to the honourable gentleman, and it's not appropriate to try to raise a point of order in the middle of an answer. It's unparliamentary. It's also, dare I say it, more than a tad discourteous. Indeed. Home Secretary.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I was merely saying that I think this country can be proud of the contribution that we have made to the refugee crisis from Syria.
Victoria Atkins.
Speaker. Of course, we welcome the measures that the Home Secretary is taking to tackle the problems in Calais. But do we not need to work on the longer-term problem of illegal immigrants trying to find their way into Europe and into this country? What measures is the Home Secretary taking to tackle this long-term issue?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. We need to ensure that we're dealing not with the symptoms of the problem, which is people arriving at Calais and trying to get into the UK, but with the origin of the issue. That is about working with countries, with the countries of origin in terms of the provision of support there, such that people have are able to have a better life, there's a better economy, there's stability that can ensure that they are less likely to wish to move to Europe. But it's also about ensuring that we catch the criminals, the people smugglers, who are helping people on their way, taking people's money and then putting them into dangerous conditions on the sea. We must make sure we break that link so that people see that paying over that money is not going to actually get them to Europe.
Jim Shannon.
We're going to thank the Secretary of State for her statement today as well. Is the Secretary of State aware of the media reports this morning which indicated that some Eastern European countries had said they weren't going to stop any of the illegal immigrants coming through their countries, which means the impact upon France and upon the United Kingdom will be greater? What steps can the Secretary of State take to address that issue?
I'm aware that there are a number of countries in Eastern Europe that are taking a number of measures in relation to this, some putting in greater physical security on their borders, but others obviously looking at the operation of what is known as the Dublin regulations, which require the claiming of asylum in the first country that an individual enters. Obviously, these are issues which we will be discussing with our European colleagues.
Mr Bridgen. No? No longer? Indeed. Mr Andrew.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Home Secretary is quite right that the scenes we're witnessing in Calais are the natural result of the failure of the borderless Schengen area. Is my right honourable friend as pleased as I am that we're not in it, and she can confirm that we will not be joining it ever?
I'm very happy to answer, Mr Speaker, very briefly, that I am pleased that we're not in the Schengen area. I think that's an absolutely right decision. We do need to be able to maintain control of our borders, and we will not be joining Schengen.
Mr Tom Brake.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does the Home Secretary think that deeper UK engagement in resolving the problems Italy and Greece are facing in handling large numbers of refugees and economic migrants would maximise the chances of securing a European solution to the European problem at Calais?
I have to say to the right honourable gentleman, we are working with a number of governments across Europe, and indeed we have given, as part of the Greek action plan that was agreed across Europe and put into place by Frontex some while ago, we have been putting resources into that Greek action plan to help support the Greek authorities in dealing with the numbers that they have coming across their border.
Mr. Michael Fabricant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Surely two of the issues is, firstly, that we are seen as an El Dorado because we have high employment rates compared with the rest of continental Europe, and we don't want to change that. But the second one is Schengen. And can I just ask, what discussions has she had with the French government to strengthen border controls that she's already mentioned with Italy and with other countries, which Schengen partners are allowed to do in cases of emergencies such as these?
As I say to my honourable friend, as I said in response earlier to a similar question, we are not part of Schengen, and obviously any discussions about how the Schengen rules are going to operate are predominantly for those countries who are within the Schengen area. But as he will have seen, the French have taken some recent action. This is not the first time that has been undertaken, and I am aware that the Schengen countries have had discussions about the question of internal border controls should emergency circumstances require them.
Mr. Sammy Wilson.
Speaker, is she concerned at reports today that the people traffickers are now causing a proliferation of people smuggling by recruiting businessmen, students and day trippers to bring people in their cars, which are subject to less scrutiny than lorry transport? And what steps does she believe can be taken to deal with this new development without massively disrupting traffic through ports?
Well, I think sadly the situation we face is that the people smugglers and the human traffickers will try every way possible to try and ply their trade. That is why it is so important that our law enforcement agencies, working with law enforcement organisations elsewhere in Europe and elsewhere, are identifying these routes of trafficking, identifying the traffickers and the people smugglers, and able to take action against them.
Mr. Damien Collins.
The Home Secretary agreed with me that the scale of the problem yesterday was exacerbated by the French strikers gaining forcible access to the Channel Tunnel, leading it to the closure of services there as well as at the port, and that the French authorities need to do more to secure the Channel Tunnel side of Coquelles. And has she been given any reassurance by the French Interior Minister on this point?
My honourable friend is right to identify the fact that, of course, the problem that occurred yesterday was the strike, the damage to the tracks. This meant that we did have lorries and others queuing and obviously all moving very slowly, such that it gave the migrants a greater opportunity to try to clamber aboard. I have had discussions with, as I said, the Interior Minister last night and, of course, previously. We are looking at the extra security that could be put around Coquelles, as well as the extra security we're putting at Calais. But the French, I have been reassured by the French authorities in terms of the police response that they intend to ensure is available at the ports so that we can deal with this problem as it arises.
This is Madeleine Moon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's estimated that 1 in 122 people on the planet is now a refugee. Many of them are children. Can the Secretary of State tell us how much of the 12 million is actually being spent on child protection for those children who are collected at the borders, that are vulnerable for being seduced into the paedophile rings and trafficked, again, by criminal gangs?
The lady has misunderstood. The £12 million is very specifically for improving the border security at the juxtaposed controls. But of course, in relation to the issue that she refers to of children who are being exploited, the children who are being trafficked, we are stepping up the efforts that we are able to make as a government in relation to that. The Modern Slavery Act is a seminal piece of legislation, the first of its kind in Europe, very important piece of legislation, which gives extra powers to law enforcement agencies and ensures that not just looking at the law enforcement side, but also the question of victims. And of course, there are a number of actions that we are taking to provide extra support to victims of human trafficking when they are identified.
Mr. Mark Pritchard.
Mr. Speaker, many of these criminal gangs, of course, will have links to the funding of terrorism, and also the capability of civilian police forces in Europe is somewhat limited in comparison to the military. Now, it's unlikely that a UN resolution will be granted in order for limited and targeted NATO military action in North Africa specifically, but I wonder what progress is being made, if any, on an EU resolution in order there is a European Union military force deployed to disrupt and degrade these logistical supply chains.
My honourable friend raises an important point, and this aspect of action on this matter is an issue that has been discussed at the European level. Any action, in particular in relation to the boats setting forth from the Libyan ports, from the Libyan coastline. But, of course, any action has to be in discussion with the Libyan authorities, and those discussions are taking place. And I can say that the United Kingdom is playing a leading role within the United Nations in looking to see if a resolution can be brought forward that will enable action to take place.
Mr. Robert Flello.
Mr. Speaker, I draw the House's attention to my declaration of interest as regards transport logistics. The Home Secretary quite rightly has identified that this isn't a recent issue. Indeed, this has been a very long an ongoing problem, and also quite rightly identified that Coquel and Calais should be the border. But of course, for many commercial drivers, they're actually stopping much further away from the port in the French side and are indeed finding themselves subject to being targeted by gangs, highly organised criminal gangs, at stopping places sometimes 100 miles or more away from Calais. Can she reassure the House that the conversations she's having take that into account and very much look at enforcing the rule of law so that commercial drivers are protected all the way through their journeys?
Yes, I mean, we're absolutely looking at that issue, and there are two aspects to that in terms of the discussions that my right honourable friend, the Immigration Minister, is having with the hauliers associations and talking about that aspect from their point of view, but also the work that the National Crime Agency, other law enforcement organisations are doing with the law enforcement elsewhere in Europe to identify the routes, to identify where these potential attempts at incursion can take place and take appropriate action.
Mr. James Cleverly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Further to the question by my honourable friend, the member for Folkestone Hyde, will my right honourable friend or her ministers have ongoing discussions with their continental European counterparts to ensure that the security arrangements that she and he discussed are resilient enough to withstand the type of industrial action that we saw recently?
I thank my honourable friend for his question. That there are indeed, when Border Force look at the issues around the security of the ports, they do of course take into account not just the work that is necessary in relation to the migrants building up at Calais and Coquel, but also had contingency arrangements in place for the potential of strike action at Calais, as indeed took place yesterday. But of course they will continue to look at those arrangements and to make sure that the arrangements are robust and that we are able to, as far as possible, ensure that the cross-channel routes are able to be maintained while we maintain the security of our border.
Neil Griffith.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Many of these people are coming from Italy, and what I would like to ask the Home Secretary is, given that Italy is feeling absolutely overwhelmed by the sheer weight of the numbers coming in, what specific help is she offering to her Italian counterparts to deal with the problems in Italy?
Yeah, good question.
We have, I mean, the longer-term answer, of course, is working with Italy and others to break this link, so that we don't see people trying to make this journey. But we will be there will be part of the Organised Immigration Crime Task Force will be operating in Italy. Some members of that task force will be operating in Italy, working with Italian authorities and others. But also there is extra resource being offered to the Italian authorities for the asylum processing in Italy.
Mr. Peter Bone.
Mr. Speaker, the Home Secretary is rightly proud of the Modern Slavery Act, the fact that it's now tougher penalties for traffickers, easier for the police to take action, and of course the creation of the Commissioner. But these are very, very evil criminal gangs, and they are equal to the gangs that deal in drugs. Yet we only put a proportion of our resources in fighting traffickers and much more in fighting drugs. Can we look at that balance to see if we've got that right?
My honourable friend is right, and obviously from the work that he did in the when his time as chairman of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Human Trafficking is well aware of these issues and, as he says, of the terrible evil that lies behind this crime. We do indeed look at the balance of these issues, and the National Crime Agency, I have asked them to give a focus on human trafficking, but we shouldn't think that the gangs either deal in drugs or deal in people. Sadly, these gangs will deal in anything that they think is going to make them money, and so many of them are dealing both in people and drugs.
Stuart C. MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State claims over and over again that the way to tackle the crisis in the Mediterranean is by breaking the link between travel and settlement. Is that the reason behind the unbelievable decision by the Government to scale down our capacity to undertake search and rescue operations in the Mediterranean? Doesn't she recognise that decision will cost lives and it should be reversed?
Yeah.
Well, I have to say to the honourable gentleman that I'm afraid he has been misinformed about exactly what happened. I think he's trying to refer to Mare Nostrum. Mare Nostrum was not a European-wide engagement. It was the Italian government's engagement. And indeed, in the year that Mare Nostrum was in place, more people died in the Mediterranean than died in the previous year. There is now a Frontex operation to which, and the UK government is giving support. HMS Bulwark has been referred to by the Prime Minister earlier today. That will be replaced by HMS Enterprise. But indeed, there are also 2 Border Force cutters taking part in this enterprise as well, in terms of saving lives in the Mediterranean. So the UK is certainly playing its part.
Mr. Alan Mack.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I join honourable members across the House in commending the work of the UK Border Force in securing our border over the last year or so. Can I also welcome the extra investment that this government has made in bolstering security across ports in northern France? And could my right honourable friend tell the House a little bit more detail what that includes?
Well, I'm pleased to do so. I thank my honourable friend for the comments he's made about Border Force and the work that they do. The money that has been made available has covered both physical security in the sense of extra fencing and looking at the layout of the port to ensure that can be more secure. There are larger areas for lorries to go into and things like that. But is also, we have put some extra dog sniffing capacity in there. Those teams have been increased as well as extra detection equipment so that we can identify when clandestines are in lorries.
Suella Fernandez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I came to this place, I represented the Home Office in several people smuggling cases, and I echo the comments made from other honourable members in commending the Border Force officers. Could my right honourable friend say more about the investigatory powers for police officers, duties of investigation for haulage companies, and sanctions for breach?
These are areas where we have, of course, in relation to human trafficking, been able to not just bring together the offences in one bill, one Act of Parliament, but also, of course, increase the sentencing and introduce some extra powers available to the police to deal with those who are responsible for the human trafficking. But we will be looking in the immigration bill that will be forthcoming later this year. We will be looking at the issues of responsibilities on others, parties, hauliers and others, in relation to this issue to make sure that our border is as secure as possible.
Mr. Gareth Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, I'm glad that the Home Secretary mentioned the work of Kent Police during her statement. They've been working tirelessly on this whole issue. It's undoubtedly the case whenever there's industrial action of this nature in France, it causes a knock-on impact into Kent and causes problems for motorists and for Kent Police. I understand that extra resources were given to Kent Police to help tackle this issue, but would the Home Secretary keep the funding under review so that they can continue with their good work?
Well, my honourable friend is right to say that obviously as a force that is policing the Dover area particularly, but obviously other ports in Kent Police do find themselves very often having to react and put the resources in to react to these various initiatives. And I can say to my honourable friend that we do consider the basis on which police forces are funded and take account obviously of the requirements that are on them.
Antoinette Sandbach.
Mr. Speaker, I understand that we're not part of the Schengen Agreement. However, it's quite clear that the actions taken by Schengen countries does impact on our borders. Can I ask the Honourable Lady, therefore, to encourage the French to do more of their operations, such as the Italian border operations, to ensure that the problem is not concentrated on Calais in the way that it has been to date?
My honourable friend does make a very good point, of course, in that the more that can be done to stop the flow of people further upstream, then the better that is for Calais, and the less pressure there will be on not just the French authorities in Calais, but obviously on border force and our juxtaposed controls. And I can assure the honourable lady that there are some healthy discussions in the European arena about the actions that can be taken by Schengen countries.
Mims Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the forthcoming immigration bill and ask the Home Secretary to continue the hard work on the differentiating between the economic migrants who are often coming here to work and the confusion with failing to differentiate between the vulnerable refugees who are coming to look for a place of safety. I think people looking on the arguments from the outside feel very confused about this work the government is doing, and I welcome the immigration bill on doing something to tackle this.
Well, I say to my honourable friend, I thank her for drawing attention to this issue. I think very often the reports of what is happening at Calais and in terms of people coming across the Mediterranean use the word refugee or asylum seeker to describe everybody who is coming, whereas in fact we know that a very significant proportion of people are economic migrants. They are people who are trying to enter Europe illegally, and that's why we think that it's very important to break that link so people see that they cannot make these journeys and arrive in Europe illegally and settle here.
Tom Pursglove.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I commend the Home Secretary in her efforts to establish the task force, but how will its activities, its important activities, be reported to this House?
Well, I can suggest to my honourable gentleman that if he is interested in the activities of this task force, he might care to attend Home Office oral questions when he would, of course, be able to question ministers on this.